Hey everyone, this is Mike Del Preti. You're listening to Context, Season 2, talking to folks in the real estate space about technologies and business models that are changing. So today I'm joined by Scott Trench, CEO of BiggerPockets. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you coming up. So, Scott, you reached out to me a couple of months ago, last year, was listening to the podcast and said, hey, let me come on up. Let's have a chat. And here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I love all your work. I think it's just fantastic. You're, obviously a thought leader in this space. I value the 180-page state of the market deck that you've produced. Subscribe to your newsletter, listen to your podcast, and I just wanted to share some of the stuff that we're doing in the investor space because it's a nice slice of the market. It's not the 80-20 of the residential housing market. That's covered by Compass and EXP and the big brokerages and then technology shops like Zillow. But there is this slice of the market for investors that is important and meaningful that I wanted to kind of share with some of the folks.
And that's going to be the deep dive today. It's all about that rental space, single family rentals investors. So in my kind of day-to-day, whether it's years ago looking at iBuyers and where they're selling houses to or buying or anything like that, the term renters, SFR, institutional investors, that keeps coming up. And what we're going to do today, and what I really liked about, our conversation before this was pulling out the data and the evidence to say, okay, we're throwing these terms around, but we really need to understand what it actually is because it's very counterintuitive and it's very different from what I think and I think what most people think. So before we get to that, most important question, how do you typically start your day?
Okay, so I came prepared with the answer to this question. I'm a huge nerd. I use a cheesy self-help journal to plan out my year called Living Your Best Year Ever. That plans out annual goals. Then I have quarterly goals. Then I plan out my weeks and check those off. I have 3 primary goals. One's around family, one's around work, and one's around hobbies. And then I have a daily planner that I do as well every morning. That lists out 3 most important things for the day, the 3 most important meetings, and then a large number of to-dos. So I don't always get it done, but I get it done enough of the time that it's very effective for me. And then, of course, I always start my day with a black coffee, Dunkin' Donuts. I add a little bit of cinnamon to the coffee, which I think makes it particularly delicious.
Dunkin' Donuts. So Dave from Homes.com and you are Dunkin' Donuts aficionados.
Absolutely. I don't think I've been in a Dunkin' Donuts in the last 5 years, but I get their coffee in bulk.
Fantastic. And how long do you typically spend in the morning doing that planning process?
5 minutes. Yeah, I spend a 30-minute chunk on Sunday evenings with my wife doing that, and then it takes me 5 minutes to just kind of write out the big things for the day.
It sounds like that helps you kind of orient for the day, every day.
Yeah, I always start the day proactive, and then sometimes I drift away and don't get it all done, but at least I'm resetting and pointing myself in the right direction every day.
Do you ever do dance parties in the middle of the day to kind of help reset?
That's a new one. I'm going to have to add that to my journaling, my habit list for next week.
Okay, so BiggerPockets. I'm guessing the majority of people listening to this have perhaps not even heard of BiggerPockets. So give us the overview. What's that?
Yeah, so BiggerPockets is a platform for residential real estate investors. We offer content and community for folks to really immerse themselves. A lot of investors want to spend hundreds of hours learning about the ins and outs of real estate, how to calculate cash flow, how to deal with tenants, how to inspect a property or estimate repair costs if they're going to purchase one and add value. So they'll immerse themselves for literally hundreds of hours listening to podcasts, reading books, watching videos, reading blog articles, asking questions in forums or Facebook groups. And we offer all of that for free or very low cost for folks to kind of begin that immersive journey. Then there's a transaction these folks want to consummate, right? And big money changes hands. That's you've talked about that, how there's an agent commission, there's lenders, there's insurance, all those different types of things that are tied to that. So we help these investors then meet investor-friendly agents, investor-friendly lenders that understand their specific needs, the different income streams they might have, and the different requirements of a purchase like that. And then after they purchase the property, there's a rehab component to many real estate transactions. There's placement of the tenant. And some investors like to DIY that process. We offer them tools to do that. Some investors like to work with property managers. We're working on building out a property manager referral network that we can then help link up these investors with. And then they hold the asset, let time go by, let the debt amortize, let the property appreciate, and go on and ultimately sell it and realize those gains.
What are some numbers behind the business? Number of subscribers, transactions, anything that you can share?
Yeah, so my favorite toy in my office is I have a counter that has every person who's created a free membership on our platform. So I think we had like 2.83 million as of yesterday, cumulative members who have signed up for the business over its 20-year history. We've sold over 3 million book titles. We have over 100 million podcast downloads, and we have tens of millions of YouTube views. I'll have to go and check that number,
Mm.
the latest on that one. But we're reaching a pretty big audience, and a lot of those folks really immerse themselves. Like I mentioned, this is not like a casual thing. I'm going to watch one video and buy a rental property. It's hey, I'm going to listen to this podcast for 50 to 100 times to get comfortable with the mental models before buying that next property.
I'm really curious how many transactions run through the platform or how many transactions you help facilitate.
That is data I would also really love to know. Because we've started as this content community business and have been bolting on the technology components, we don't have that data one-to-one, but we estimate that it's in the billions of dollars in transactions annually by our subscriber base.
Yeah. I mean, 2.83 million members. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And I mean, BiggerPockets clearly is, if you're a mom and pop investor in the rental space, like this is the de facto community and platform to go to for sure.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we're really proud of it. And we think it adds a lot of value. And we estimate that there are 17 million residential real estate investors in this country who own at least one property outside of their primary residence. And so, we have a fairly good chunk of that. We want to reach the remaining 14 million folks, though, that are not members of our community yet.
Yeah. All right. So let's set some context for the rental industry in the US. I'm going to start with a myth that you can pick apart. But the myth is that institutional investors are buying up housing inventory and taking over.
That is busted. We estimate that there are 18 million single-family rental properties in this country, and that institutions, defined as people who own over 1,000 units, own less than 3% of those properties. Another 3% are owned by mini institutions who own between 100 and 999, and 90% of these single-family rental properties are owned by mom and pops with 10 or fewer properties. There's a power curve, so about 53% of those properties are owned by investors with just one property. So the industry is dominated by mom and pops who have just a handful, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 properties outside of, again, their primary residence. And these folks are ordinary people. They're working full-time jobs. They're investing in stocks. They have investing in their 401ks. They're frugal. They're using the saved funds that they accumulate in their personal lives to put down on down payments, or they're keeping primary residences that they used to own or used to live in as rentals upon moving out. They're self-managing in many cases, and they're using this as a supplement or a part of their overall retirement plans.
Just to read that back. So out of the entire single-family rental market in the United States, 90% are owned by mom and pop investors.
That's right.
That's 10 or fewer units.
Yeah, and I like to add into the mix duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes because, like single families, you can also use a 30-year fixed-rate Fannie Mae insured mortgage to purchase those, and that's a huge competitive advantage. That allows these mom and pop investors to get, significantly more leverage, 25% down payment or equity on those if they're using a traditional financing mechanism, and it allows them to get much better terms than a lot of the big institutional players. And then last, these folks can go in and manage the property. Like, hey, if times get tough, they can go and fire the property manager and take over management. They can go and fix, change the lock themselves or change the toilet. That's not always the dream of being a landlord, but it is a huge defense mechanism and competitive advantage, and why I think you're going to see this market continue to have that shape for a long time to come.
The market's changed a lot over the past 12 to 18 months. And between these two groups, the mom and pop investors and the institutional investors, what sort of trends or changes have you seen over the past year?
Well, the institutions, at least in the early part of 2023, I think it's still true to the end of 2023, became net sellers. I'm one of the few folks, I think, in the industry that was never really I don't think the institutions will ever get past 5% of the total single-family rental stock in this country, much less 10%. And I think there's a lot of people who would violently disagree with that assertion. I was not surprised to see that, and I think that these folks have that advantage. Just like everybody else in the housing industry, transaction volume slowed for all investors, including the mom and pops, right? They're, again, struggling with the same problems that homeowners have, where they're locked in to their low interest rate mortgages, right? If you sell the property and buy another property, you're going to have to get a new mortgage on that and swap your 3 or 4% interest rate mortgage for a 6.5%, 7% one. 1031 exchange are a really popular mechanism to defer taxes in real estate. And if you reduce the debt balance on the new purchase, that's called a reduction in boot, and you have to pay tax on that just like you would for a gain. So it kind of defeats the purpose. So it's really hard for folks to access their equity. It's hard to get second mortgages in there. So you've seen transaction volumes plummet in the investor space, just like you see it in the single-family housing space. The difference is the institutions are net sellers, and our BiggerPockets audience of small mom and pop investors are continuing to buy.
Continuing to buy. And the percentage breakdown between the mom and pops, the small institutional investors, and the big institutional investors, as a percentage, are those percentages changing at all? Like for whatever, for over the past 10 years, the past year, are you seeing any change or is that just kind of it?
Over the past 10 years, you certainly saw institutional investors continue to grow. You saw that really geographically concentrated. So when I talk about that, that's for the nation as a whole. But if you're an investor or if you're a homeowner in Atlanta, you're going to feel very differently about that presence, especially in certain neighborhoods or certain other concentrated geographies where they really are a big presence in purchasing a significant volume of inventory. And they may own as much as 10% of the stock in certain of those geographies. And the nation as a whole, they're a non-story. You got to spend 97% of your time on the smaller investors and 3% of your time on the institutions. They're just really easy to write about for big publications.
Yeah. And I mean, what do you think about that? Are institutional investors good for America, bad for America?
I think in these markets where you see higher institutional level presence, you're going to see more volatility in housing prices. So the stability that you've seen over the last 100 years, relatively speaking, in the real estate market compared to other asset classes, I think that will change with institutional involvement when, these properties become a tradable good in certain geographies. I think that will be, again, very limited and will not be the story of it because, again, that institution is now competing with a mom and pop investor who has all these advantages, an infinite timeline. They don't have a fun timeline of 5 years where they got to produce a 17 or whatever promised IRR to their investors. These are folks that are just going to buy property that let them amortized forever. And, the investor kind of has an interesting journey where they're in it for the higher returns and the leverage that comes with real estate investing, the ability to multiply that appreciation rate. But once the property's paid off, they're often very content with that, even though it's a much lower return, because that was the goal, is financial freedom. I have a couple paid off duplexes. I'm good to go. I've got, $4,000 or $5,000 a month in passive income.
What should the story be? Over the past couple of years, the story has been, institutional investors pose some, a growing risk for Americans that want to own homes. And that's exciting and it's hype. What do you think the story should be?
I think the story should be real estate largely remains unchanging throughout the years. Technologies to help add convenience and assist in transactions and lower costs continue to advance. But at the end of the day, wealth is created in real estate to the tune of trillions of dollars by ordinary Americans who purchase it, operate it reasonably well, run it like a business, and hold it for decades. And it's not that exciting, but it's that powerful. And I think that's the allure of real estate for so many millions of Americans.
Okay, that's good. Shifting gears. So how long have you been with BiggerPockets?
I am going to celebrate my 10-year anniversary this year.
Yeah. Okay. And how does BiggerPockets make money?
So I told you we have the three parts of the business, right? We have the education piece, content community, we have the transaction element, and we have the management and holding phase of the journey. And we have three business models. We have a content and media business where we sell advertising, we sell books, and we have an annual conference. We have a subscription product that powers the journey with, calculators that help investors analyze deals. We have property management software through a partnership with RentReady that allows our investors to access property management software. We have accounting software. We have leases and landlord forms that are prepared for all 50 states. And then last, and what we've been entering into in the last 2 years, is a marketplace model where we connect our investors with investor-friendly agents and investor-friendly lenders. And we're going to build out investor-friendly tax professionals and investor-friendly property managers here in 2024. So these are big pain points. Investors want specialists that understand real estate in many of these professional fields like accounting, and they want agents that know the investor a set of problems and how to drive returns over an agent that specializes in helping residential buyers buy their primary residence.
You've been at BiggerPockets for 10 years. Were you in the industry before that?
No, I spent 1 year as a financial analyst over at Dish Network and joined BiggerPockets 1 year after graduating college. So my whole career has been here.
So 10 years. What have you learned about the real estate industry over that past 10 years that you wish you knew when you started?
I think it goes back to what you were asking me about what the story should be, right? It's the market. It ebbs and flows. Transaction volume, clearly is related to interest rates and the changes in the market conditions, but the story really remains the same, right? People buy property, they hold it over time, and long-term appreciation rates, amortization of debt, and then holding on to that property, eking out as much cash flow as possible during the operational period. Those are the fundamentals of wealth, and wealth is built, you buy real estate and wait.
If you had to distill that learning down into a message that you would give to yourself back then in terms of your job and how you run your business, what would that be?
It would be making that experience as easy as possible for the investor. What we should have done 10 years ago is really begin this journey of connecting investors with professionals. The agent is the center of this whole puzzle for investors. They're so critical because they bring referrals to lenders. They bring referrals to other professionals like the accountants. They bring contractors to the table that help these investors complete the rehab projects. They bring referrals to property managers. And so it's this core four concept of your agent, your contractor, your lender, and your property manager that the investor really kind of needs to be successful with that, knowing that it's this community aspect. The investors are not on their own, and bringing that together, I think, is probably the big.
Why don't we just replace it all with technology?
I think you can make it easier with technology, and we certainly are going to try to do that. Like we help investors with a rent estimation tool that pulls comps for investors and allows them to more easily do that. So there's ways that technology can speed the analysis process. There's ways that technology can help you reach more prospective tenant applicants. There's ways to manage those relationships. There's ways to allow you to scale a little bit more easily. Fundamentally, investment in real estate is I'm making a bet, a long-term bet on this piece of property in this location for quantitative and qualitative reasons, right? Like, hey, there's a light rail going in over here. I bought my first property 10 years ago. I studied the market. I drove around the block. I met with local investors, and they were like, yeah, this pocket of town is a really good spot to be in because of this, this, and this. And how is technology going to ever be able to fully encapsulate all of those things? I don't think it will. It can certainly help. It can certainly be an ally.
What you're describing, though, is so inefficient. You're connecting investors to agents, and the agent's going to make a referral to this and that and that. Like, oh, but that's not the fastest, most efficient, most productive way to do it, right? I mean, use data science, get all the data, figure out who the quantitatively best lender is, the best investments to make in a home. Why don't we just get rid of all that nonsense with the tech and big data?
I think if you want that, you go invest in REITs. And those are a perfectly, valid way to invest and get exposure to real estate. You can get exposure to single-family homes by investing in Invitation Homes. Anybody can do that. You can buy their stock. It's publicly traded. You can do that in a variety of REITs. But the investors that are looking to purchase property directly, they want the inefficiency. Because with that inefficiency comes the opportunity for that higher return, right? You shouldn't be investing in real estate if you're hoping for an 8 to 10% return. It requires a lot of work. I just told you you're going to spend 100 hours probably immersing yourself, learning about the ins and outs of this. You're going to be changing toilets at some point or dealing with those things. But you also have the chance to earn a 17, 18, 20% return if you're in a 3, 4% long-term appreciating market, if you use a 25, 30% down payment and use that high leverage, if you're willing to be hands-on to de-risk that process in the early years. So it's a trade-off there that millions and millions of people are willing to take and accept, but it's certainly inefficient. We try to make it a little bit less inefficient.
I mean, it's a bit of a leading question because the promise of technology to change real estate has been very high, and if you look over the past 5, 7 years, many dozens of billions of dollars have been invested into companies to do exactly that. And I think what a lot of folks realize over time is it's not working. It's not actually changing real estate. And the question is, why?
One thing to noodle on is that the population of investors who currently own property in this country is older. It skews very heavily to the older population. Over 55-year-olds own more than half of those rental properties. We are polite at BiggerPockets, so we refer to this population as not digitally native. And so that, I think, is one of the things that's impacting that transition or that adoption of technology in many cases.
Are you seeing a younger set of investors adopting more tech?
Yes, so the BiggerPockets audience is mostly digitally native. So we're really reaching many more of those investors. And most of the people who are buying into the market or expanding their portfolios are these digitally native investors.
And what are the 2 technology products that really resonates with that audience?
Almost everyone who's got a property is using some form of property management software to do that. There's a variety of applications out there. Some like the big ones like Buildium and Appfolio that really service the property manager or the institutional investor. And then there's a large number of free to consume or very low cost property management softwares like RentReady or TurboTenant that are adopted by a lot of the smaller investors. So that's pretty common, is basic CRMs to manage the tenant relationship, listing the property on the major platforms like Zillow and those types of things. So there are pieces and places where investors are doing it, but that holistic system to run the business from end to end, that hasn't been built or achieved at scale to this point.
Hasn't been built or hasn't been adopted?
Hasn't been adopted, I think is a better way to put it.
Yeah. Why?
I think these investors are pretty scrappy. Maybe that's that blend of like, who is this mom and pop investor, right? They're typically earning between $100,000 and $200,000 a year. Our audience almost overwhelmingly earns between $50,000 and $250,000 a year. If you're earning much less than that, you can't really get to the starting point. But if you're earning way more than that, you're probably not willing to put in 100 hours to learn the ins and outs of real estate investing, and want to spend your nights and weekends fixing up your first few properties. So you have this kind of sweet spot of like this maybe $100,000 a year household income earner who is willing to do that, and because their value of their time is $50 an hour, they don't want to pay somebody $75 an hour to go in and make the property rent ready and those types of things. And that person's going to be very cost conscious. They're going to be very thoughtful about when they invest in a product to help them systematize their business. And they're going to be very willing to be hands-on to circumvent that cost in a lot of cases. That's how they got $50,000 to put down on the rental property in the first place. So it's kind of ingrained in them. And again, I'm talking broad stroke about a very large population of people, but I think that probably has something to do with it. Any system that seeks to serve this population holistically has to understand that about the investor, that some of them want to do it DIY and are willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work to cut those costs. And some people has to be passive, and it has to take up as little of their time as possible, and they're willing to give up the returns or spend more to get that passivity. And another one here is, investors nowadays, they're investing out of state in a lot of cases. So maybe you have 3 properties in Denver, maybe you have 2 properties in Kansas City, and you have 2 properties in Memphis, Tennessee. Well, you're going to have property managers and a team for this one. You're going to have self-manage these 3 over here. So there's kind of this scrappiness in these portfolios that are built brick by brick and piece by piece. That is the practical reality of a lot of portfolios.
So speaking of scrappiness, a lot of agents are quite scrappy. There's some overlap between your world and I might say the world of most of the people listening to this. Some, not a lot. What advice or what would you call out as an opportunity for the people listening to this?
I think that Gen Z in particular and the younger millennials are increasingly thinking about their home as an investment. So there's an increasing desire for, well, how does this home not only help me build family memories, but also maybe bring a little income into my pocket. A lot of states nowadays are passing laws that allow for ADU construction or essentially rezone large tracts of their land for duplex, triplex, quadplex, or other multifamily development. And so I think increasingly, as affordability drops, people are thinking about how do I turn that property into an investment? And if you're an agent that can help, a first-time home buyer think about, hey, this area over here can be converted into an ADU, and you can Airbnb that and generate $1,000, $1,500 a month, offsetting your mortgage costs considerably. We call this house hacking at BiggerPockets, and it's a very popular entry point into real estate investing. And it probably underweights the number of investors in this country because, a house hacker, somebody who moves into a house and rents out the basement or the ADU, they're going to be listed as a primary residence.
I'm curious about this. So in 2023, there were about 4 million existing home sale transactions. How many of those are your audience?
We believe that investors transact between 15 to 18% of the total number of transactions happening in the country.
Okay, that's good news. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking about, oh, geez, how could I become more knowledgeable about the investor side and become that kind of investor super agent, super broker, super team?
I think that's right. I think if you can attach investors to your practice, you're going to have access to another 15 to 18% of the market in your local area, and maybe another 3 to 4% of this population of people who are willing to do a quasi investment with their first home purchase, maybe a duplex, maybe a house with an ADU, or a project that can get them there. And I think that will make you very attractive to it. It's a boost, and I think these days a lot of agents would love to get access to 25% more volume.
If I gave you $1 million to invest in BiggerPockets right now, your business, what would you spend it on?
A mobile first experience. We are way behind the times. We do not have a mobile app. A lot of members really want to network in the forums and those types of things. That's a really convenient spot. We want to make a mobile first experience that allows you to easily access the content on our platform, that recommends the right stuff to you if you're a rookie or an experienced investor, and that allows you to access our tools while you're on site looking at a property and run the numbers real quick or update your estimate for your rehab on there. So that's on the docket here.
It took you about 10 milliseconds to come up with that answer. That wasn't editing. You were just immediately right there. Knew that. Mobile first. That's good.
We do a very careful job planning out each year and our budgets, and we have all of our incremental investment cases laid out for all that stuff. So,
okay. Lastly, just kind of wrapping up, in the world of real estate, is there an opinion you hold that you don't think many people agree with?
I think it's this belief in the mom and pop investor. I just think the competitive advantages that a mom and pop investor has in terms of being able to cut costs, access financing that allows them to drive their LTV way up at much lower risk than a lot of institutional buyers, and their perpetual timeline, the fact that they don't ever have to sell unless their personal financial circumstance, might force it. I think those are immense competitive advantages, and people way overestimate the presence that institutional investors are going to have in the single family rental space. And I think that when I go to certain conferences, I'll call out IMN, really great conference that I attend in the single family rental forum. I'm not alone in that belief, but close to it. So
Really? Why do you think that is?
I think that institutions prepare very thoughtful thesis for why they're going to drive great returns, which is how they raise hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to purchase property. And they're very, very convincing theses. I also think that institutions are ideal clients for B2B SaaS software products. And so there's a cottage industry that kind of sprang up over the last couple of years servicing these institutional buyers. I'll give you another example, build to rent. Right, that was an interesting one that a lot of people thought that was going to take over the world here a few years ago. And these build-to-rent guys, guess who they're advertising with and selling all their properties to nowadays?
Yeah, to you, mom and pop investors.
To mom and pop investors, because the institutions aren't buying them anymore. And it's a great bargain. So a lot of our investors are like, well, I'm going to go buy a build-to-rent property in Oklahoma here because I can get a 2023 or 2024 construction. Property management's it's designed for this. I can get a really good rate. The builder's going to buy it down for me because we all know about how the new construction industry has been thriving and giving concessions at the same time in the last year. Kind of an unexpected twist, or one that I wouldn't have foreseen at least. So I think those are some of the reasons you're seeing such bullishness around the institution. When look, I don't think these guys are going to get flushed or like lose all their money or anything. I just don't think they're going to be able to drive mid double-digit returns in this space the way that they thought, and they're going to slowly leave.
Right. And the power of the mom and pop investors. Maybe that's a good title for this episode.
They're very collectively powerful
Yeah.
in aggregate.
Cool. Well, that's it for today, Scott. I really appreciate you stopping by and having a chat. It's really fascinating for me because, I've thought the same thing in terms of the power of the institutional investors and mom and pop investors. They've been in my mind, but no idea in terms of the size and scale and the scope of where they sit in the market. So I really appreciate the context around that.
Absolutely. You always talk about that $80 billion TAM for agent commissions, which I know waxes and wanes with transaction volume. And, investors use those same agents and are a part of that network. And again, not the 80-20 of this market. The 80-20 is the residential home buyer, but they are the 20.
Yeah.
And so that's something to keep in the back of your minds, people who are listening, on how you want to think about the market holistically.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Scott. Appreciate you coming in. This has been Context. I'm Mike Del Preti, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.